This week we look at transformative learning, and it's really an interesting concept. And if you take a look at the length of this lecture, you're probably thinking to yourself, holy smokes, Spielmaker is going to be talking to us for a very long time. I want you to know that I've embedded a few videos into this week's conversation and my overview or reflection on transformative learning. And so not to be frightened, I'm not going to be talking the entire time about transformative learning, but rather engaging with you kind of in real time, sort of. I'm going to be showing those videos as I have this conversation with you or present what my understanding is of transformative learning. Now, oftentimes I will have videos that are, standalone, and this week you have another one too that kind of reviews the chapter in a way. But this one I really feel like needed to be embedded so that it's not out of context with my comments. And so hopefully it'll work. We'll see if the technology will allow me to get that to work. I have one video that had a little issue, and we'll get to that, but I think it's going to work just great. What is transformative learning? Well, one thing I really like about your text is it does a very good job of defining terms at the get-go. And they actually kind of go out here, I think, on a little bit of a limb and call it a learning theory. But as I read it and have watched some other videos and done some other readings, a lot of folks consider it not really its own theory, but actually a type of learning. And in fact, your text mentions this as well, a type of learning which I would argue is housed pretty firmly in a constructivism type of learning model, and that theory of constructivism, where you're constructing meaning from various situations, and we'll get to situated cognition later, is very constructivist. So I think this is a type of learning that is inside of that traditional learning theory that we've already talked about. And for this conversation and this lecture, I'm going to be talking about a few of my own personal experiences with transformative learning. And I'm sure that all of you, as you read the chapter, and I'm actually hoping that you've read the chapter before you watch this video. In fact, if you haven't done that, you might want to stop it now, read the chapter, and then restart this video. But what I really liked about it is that it was a very personal chapter in that you could relate to it in a very, very personal way for each type of experience they were talking about. So my presentation or reflection to you today is going to be on my recollections of when I have gone through a process of transformative learning, this type of learning. And as you recall, it was talking about it being very personal, and that when you've had a learning experience that has changed you, like after that experience, you say, wow, I am different. I have a different perspective because of what happened. That's transformative. If others observe that in you, they say, wow, that person, since they had that experience, has really changed, then that's truly transformative, because it's not just you yourself thinking, I'm a changed person, but other people can observe that as well. And I think that that's the key, is when others observe it as well, you've probably gone through what your text would refer to as transformative learning. And it's something that we can hopefully get people to be engaged with or use it as a tool for particular types of content. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I had an individual experience. I went to a National Council for the Social Studies, their annual conference in 2012. And after this one presentation, I can tell you that I was changed. I was changed and had a different perspective on how we bring citizens into this country, what our expectations are of them. I was changed and explained this to others around me. I have shared this video from this very conference in a little snippet that I'm going to show you. But it changed me in quite a miraculous way, in the way I think about people who want to immigrate to this country. So I have the video embedded here, and unfortunately, it's not really embedded. I'm going to open it up in a link. This website where this is housed, and I've created a bit.ly in case you want to go watch it on your own, because as soon as I click this, it's going to record every sound in this room. I'm hoping it's going to be quiet. But if you would like to see it as it is, streaming from the web, you can go to this little connection. But for right now, I'm going to pull it up, and you can see that this is an hour and 36 long session that I sat through at the National Council for Social Studies. And it was a panel discussion on citizenship with the former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Gerda Wiseman Klein, who I had never heard of, and moderated by Eric Liu, who was a great guy at asking questions between these two women. I am a fan of Sandra Day O'Connor. I find her to be really interesting. I've read a couple of her books, and I was very excited to go to this. I wasn't really thinking that I was going to get very excited about people being sworn in and receiving citizenship. But my life was changed as a result of this event, and I'm going to show you a couple of clips about it, and then I'll come back to you on the other side.
Please be seated. Thank you so much. That was terrific. We have before us today 20 candidates from 12 different countries. Candidates, as I call your country of your current citizenship, please rise and remain standing until the call of countries is concluded and all of our candidates are standing. For the next time that you sit, you will be a United States citizen. Afghanistan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, China, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Mexico, Philippines, Russia, Somalia, Thailand, Turkey, and Vietnam. Director Corsano, at this time, it is my privilege to present to you 20 candidates for naturalization from 12 different countries. Each candidate has been examined by a USCIS officer and found to be of good moral character and attached to the principles of the Constitution of the United States. Each of them has been found eligible for citizenship in every respect. Therefore, I respectfully request that you administer the oath of allegiance on behalf of the United States government.
Thank you, Ms. Lay. And will now all the candidates please raise their right hand and repeat after me. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. And now, congratulations, a big round of applause for the newest citizens of the United States of America.
Now, I had never heard of that oath for the naturalization ceremony, and I don't know how many of you have ever heard that oath. So, interestingly enough, I was pretty surprised and thought to myself, that's what people say when they want to be an American citizen. I was at a point of learning. Now, interestingly enough, prior to this, where she said thank you before she started the names of the countries, there was a really nice inspirational movie about immigration. There was a singing of our national anthem, but that's why I give you the bit.ly. If you're really interested in this, you can go watch the entire thing. I was changed. I do want to show you a little bit more of this clip because yeah, it was really nice to see that inspirational movie that they showed at the front. It was really educational to hear the naturalization ceremony. But what came next was really what transformed me.
Wow.
Wish I could fast forward through these applause, but every time I move this little needle, it goes too far.
Thank
So
you.
please be patient.
Thank you. All right, and would everyone please be seated? Our candidates included. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today. And again, what a wonderful opportunity for us, not only for our newest citizens, but I think for all of our guests to see what it means and what it's like to become a citizen. We hope that you bring this message back to your students. It's such a special day for all of our candidates, for us, and we hope for you today. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Ms. Gerda Weissman-Klein. For over 6 decades, Ms. Klein has captivated audiences worldwide with her powerful message of hope, inspiration, love, and humanity as an author, as a historian, and as a speaker. In her speeches and books, she draws from a wealth of life experiences, from surviving the Holocaust to her journey to the United States, accepting an Oscar and an Emmy for a documentary based on her life, her constant fight to promote tolerance, encourage community service, and combat hunger. In 2008, Ms. Klein founded Citizenship Counts, a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate today's youth on the tenets of citizenship. How fitting she's here with us today. On February 15th, 2011, President Obama awarded Ms. Klein, along with 14 other notable individuals, the 2010 Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Gerda Weissman-Klein.
Thank you. Thank you with all my heart. The search of this Corsano. Sleep. I feel this is a sacred moment, but I truly feel inadequate to be the one to address you, my dear fellow citizen, because in this room is someone who is the very aura of justice, of caring and humanity, the most esteemed and beloved, the Justice O'Connor. Justice, it is to you. And I truly feel that your words to our new fellow Americans would be the ones to bring the greatest weight of this honor bestowed upon you today. What you just received is the greatest gift, more precious than any jewels, than anything that one can possess. It is the pledge of freedom which is yours today. And perhaps if you permit me to tell you only very briefly what becoming a citizen meant to me. I was born in Poland. I had a life probably not much different from the lives of your grandparents, in all likelihood a little slower and a little more old-fashioned. On the 3rd of September 1939, when I was 15 years old, the Nazi armies took our town, and I lost everything I was a part of and loved. My beloved parents, my only brother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. I spent 3 years in the ghettos, 3 years in slave labor and concentration camps, and I was part of this infamous death march, which you might have read or seen on television. We were 4,000 girls divided into 2 forms. Of ours, fewer than 120 survived. My beloved father asked me in the last moment of parting on a hot day in June, he asked where my skiing boots were. And I said, why? My father said, I want you to wear them. One didn't argue with one's father in those days. I put those boots on that hot day. I wore them for 3 long years, and I'm quite sure that they paid an incredible help in my survival, sleeping outside in the snow and hail and what have you. But I'd like to share with you my own moment of the greatest joy of my life. It was on May 7th, the end of the death march, when we heard American planes overhead, and our captors decided to lock us up in an empty bicycle factory attaching a time bomb. I know it sounds like a cheap thriller. It started to rain. The rain resulted in mud. The mud prevented the bomb timer from connecting, and obviously it never went off. The doors were thrust open by the good Czech people calling, if anyone is here, get out. The war in Europe was over. I cannot recall the feeling of that moment. I think one's being has to empty itself of every emotion to make room for an onrush of crushing joy. I experienced that as I saw a jeep at its foot, no longer the despised swastika, but the white star of the American army approaching. There were 2 men in the jeep. One jumped out toward me. I looked at that man as I would be looking at a young god, but of course I was afraid. I told him, I'm Jewish, you know. For a long time he didn't answer me. And then in a voice which betrayed his own emotion, he said, so am I. And then he asked an incredible question. He asked if he could see the other ladies. I'd like to give you a picture of that moment. I was in rags. I weighed 68 pounds. My hair was white. Now it's natural. I had not had a bath in 3 years. And here was this handsome young American hoping the door open for me. By what miracle could I have thought that I'll marry him a year later, and he will bring me to this blessed country which I so proudly claim my own? All I wanted to do is marry him, have children, become a member of my community, be free and never to be hungry again. Incredible things have been heaped upon me. I have not been Mother Teresa, giving my life to the poor. I have not been wealthy to be able to endow good works. I have not discovered the cure for cancer. I was an average woman. I only tried to repay for this incredible thing that has been given to me, my freedom in this beloved country, to do just a little, to tell others, our children and grandchildren, how privileged we are. My dear friends, to me, and I'm quite sure to you, it is a joy and a privilege to know that wherever you are in the world, if something happens to you, you can go to the American Embassy. American Embassy, a homecoming and help and embrace. I'm thinking of our 2 hostages, which were held, if you remember, in a gun, who strayed innocently across the border. It took years of all our embassies and countless amounts of money and care to rescue 2 Americans back to freedom. This is what you have become today, a precious person, an American citizen. I feel especially moved to understand that many of you hold the profession which I think is the noblest of them all, to be teachers. When I am asked, because I was stopped in my education, I finished my education at age 14 and a half, people ask me, why did you go on? Who gave you the knowledge? Who was your lodestar? My beloved parents, of course, and my teachers. Perhaps I didn't pay too much attention, but something must have lodged in my brain to make me go on. You are the ones that are broadening the horizon of our children, to make them understand the preciousness of knowledge which is available. And perhaps at some days when you get frustrated, as I'm sure you will, this might have been the day when you have lighted a spark in someone's brain which will rise to greatness. Perhaps become a president of our beloved country. Perhaps write a children's poem. Or perhaps just be a precious citizen of our great country. May God bless you. May God bless you all, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Well, so Gerda Weissen-Klein, I had never heard of this woman, but she was able to engage with me in such a way with her comments concerning her experience that I was transformed. From that moment on, I have looked at immigration. I have looked at people who come here who give up things and the risks they have taken in a different way. And so I just wanted to give you an example of what transformative learning might look like. And I'm sure each of you could share some sort of experience where maybe you went in, you learned something, and then someone was so compelling. And I don't know that we always have to be emotionally touched, although I'll tell you that there wasn't a dry eye in the room. But we have to really engage at a very deep and personal level. And that usually brings out emotion, and that is oftentimes very transformative, as as the text talks about. So you can go and you can finish watching that. You can see one of my heroes, Sandra Day O'Connor, and the conversation. You can watch the entire thing. You can watch the inspirational movie at the front. But I wanted to give you an example of a case study of Spielmaker, if you will, of individual, informal, transformative learning. Now let's move this on a little bit, because in your text, it talks about sites of transformative learning, and it lists individuals separately and then does classroom and online. and then has one more section. But to me, individual is not really a site other than you can say inside me personally. But I think individuals have it in an informal way, like you just saw. I'm attending a conference. I'm there as part of a trade show. Just happened to get lucky that that was going to be a presentation. It was kind of a coincidence, if you will. It was that synergistic from last week kind of opportunity to learn. And the next type that your text talks about is the kind of learning that you would have transformative, but it might be in a different setting, a classroom or online. And it could be in a formal like this course or non-formal form, according to your text on page 91. So I wanted to give you an example of transformative learning that I had in my graduate program, and it was a course, it was a Foundations of Education course. And we saw this movie, and I may have seen it as an undergraduate, 20 plus years ago, but I had completely forgotten about it. None of this looked familiar to me. But this is about the Little Rock Nine. And maybe some of you have seen this, and if you have, you can maybe skip ahead in this video. But this is a 3-minute and 56 video. And I want to talk a little bit on the backside about how this affected me in a formal setting.
Until 1954, segregation laws in some states forbade black students from attending the same schools as white students. In 1954, the United States Supreme Court outlawed segregation throughout the country and ordered that white-only schools must be open to African American students with all deliberate speed. The governor of the state of Arkansas vowed to defy the order. "Blood will run in the streets if Negro pupils should attempt to enter Central High School," he said. The school board of the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, planned otherwise. To comply with the Supreme Court order, the school board of the city of Little Rock announced that the city's all-white secondary school could now accept black students. On the first day of school in September 1957, 9 African American children, later referred to as the Little Rock Nine, planned to enroll in Little Rock Central High School. Elizabeth Eckford was one of the 9. The Little Rock School Board asked parents of the 9 students not to accompany their children to school because the board feared that the presence of African American parents would incite a mob. The governor of Arkansas sent the National Guard into Little Rock, claiming that there was a danger of violence. Arrangements were made for all 9 students to meet off campus and approach the school accompanied by a lawyer and under military protection. Because the Eckford family had no telephone, Elizabeth was unaware of the arrangements, so she set out alone. When she got off the bus near Central High School, Elizabeth saw a crowd of angry white people and hundreds of armed soldiers whom the governor had sent to prevent the 9 students from entering the school. Elizabeth thought she might be safe if she walked behind the Arkansas soldiers to the school entrance. Believing the guards were present to protect her, she tried to pass through the line several times before being forced back into the white crowd.
The crowd began to follow me, calling me names. All of a sudden, my knees began to shake, and I wondered whether I could make it. It was the longest block I ever walked in my whole life. Even so, I was not too scared, because I thought the guards would protect me. When I got in front of the school, I went up to a guard again, but he just looked straight ahead and did not move to let me pass. I did not know what to do. Just then, another guard let some white students through. When I tried to squeeze past him, he raised his bayonet. Somebody started yelling, "Lynch her! Lynch her!" I tried to see a friendly face. I made eye contact with an old woman, but she spat on me. I looked down the block and saw a bench at the bus stop. I ran to the bench and sat down.
Some of the crowd followed Elizabeth to the bench, shouting, "Drag her over to the tree," a way of saying they would lynch her. As Elizabeth sat on the bench for what seemed like an eternity, a white woman named Grace Lorch made her way through the crowd and spoke to Elizabeth. Elizabeth slowly lifted her eyes and looked up at the stranger. Then she got up. Walking close beside her, the woman guided her to a nearby bus stop. Elizabeth got on the bus and escaped from the mob. Over the next few weeks, the governor continued to fight federal authorities until finally, on September 24, President Eisenhower federalized the Arkansas National Guard control and ordered the 101st Airborne Division to escort the 9 students into the school. For the remainder of the school year, the Guard accompanied the students from class to class. The Little Rock Nine eventually succeeded in integrating Central High School. Elizabeth later received a degree in history from the Central State College in Wilberforce, Ohio. She served in the United States Army for several years and found employment as a social worker and substitute teacher. Elizabeth returned to Little Rock in 1974 to live in her family's home, the only one of the 9 to return to that city to live. In 1999, 42 years later after the crisis, Elizabeth and the other Little Rock Nine students received the Congressional Gold Medal from President Clinton as a permanent remembrance of their unforgettable moment of courage.
There are several other Little Rock Nine videos. In fact, there's one that's the newscaster version, which was the one that I actually watched in my course, but it's longer and it didn't capture kind of the whole story. So I chose this one, but if you go to YouTube, you can find more on Little Rock Nine. But I picked this because after I watched this and we had a conversation or discussion in our class, I just was so enamored with the topic because it was just so surreal to me. I had grown up in the Western United States, and I just didn't have a feeling of how could that happen? How could that happen? Why would we ever do that? And so I was transformed by watching this video. And so I'm going to come back to that a little bit in the civil rights movement when we talk about it, but that's the kind of transformative learning that took place. In the conversation afterward, the professor talked to us quite a bit about the plight of being an African American, but also being an African American woman, and what that might be, and how could we ever really understand, without actually being inside that body and inside that mind, what it's like to grow up in this country, whether it be here in the West or in the South or the Northeast. How we feel others perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. We can probably never truly understand. And that was transformative to me, is that regardless of how I think I understand and the empathy I might have, I probably can never truly understand. And that was the learning. That was the teachable moment came at that point. I cannot ever really comprehend it. I can get maybe close, but not truly. So that was my formal situation. From your text, in addition to that, it talks about, there's a couple of quotes I really liked. There's usually some assessment, outcome, or closure to the experience. And in this case, it was in my class. We were talking about how the low socioeconomic status of Blacks and why their test scores might be in different cycles and so forth. Students are there to learn something, and rarely is it to change their perspectives of themselves. Rarely is it to change a perspective of themselves, but perspective transformations do sometimes happen. And in this case, I would say that this particular experience on this particular day in my class, my perspective did change. And so it says sometimes, but I really think for it to be transformative, it really has to happen. And there are some educators who actively engage in practices to promote this type of learning along with other content-based learning objectives. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with my job, my previous job as the Ag in the Classroom director in just a moment. Ideally, higher education offers the invitation to, and that should have been think, to be, and to be act in new and enhanced ways. These learning environments sometimes challenge individuals to move beyond their comfort zones of the known, of self and of others. And I had taken a couple of other courses that really caused me to think. And I remember sitting one day and the professor asked a very, I will say, controversial type question, and the room was very quiet. And some of you have done this in your classes, and you want to sort of jump in. But after a good 60 seconds of silence, this professor said, "I am not bothered by awkward silences, but I'll wait till one of you has something to say on this topic." And so it should offer an invitation to think and to be, sorry about the K not being there, and to act in new and enhanced ways. And if it doesn't, as the facilitator of learning, you need to create those kinds of spaces. There's another term used in this section called dialogic teaching, and I've put a link here, and I'm going to make this PowerPoint available in addition to this video in our course this week. But that talks about what dialogic teaching is, and your text doesn't really define that, but I'm going to open it here quickly. But essentially, it means using talking, communication. It means having a dialogue to carry out teaching and learning, and that's what we do in our discussions, and that's why they're so important to this course. You engage students in dialogue. Teachers explain ideas, clarify the point and purpose of activity, model scientific ways to use language, and help students grasp new scientific ways of describing phenomena. It's all about communication. That's not just the speaking part, but there's the listening part. So it goes back and forth. So that was a term that was introduced in that section. Types of transformative learning, individual workplace. Challenging hegemony. Norma Ray is mentioned in your text, and this is all about in the workplace where you gain some sort of understanding that things are not as they should be, and you are transformed, and you actually take action. In this case, Norma Ray was transformed by a labor union boss who said, "I can help you get out of this situation." She took a lot of risks with her family and her job as a whistleblower to change her situation. So this was a movie made popular in 1979. You can go and watch, I think, the entire thing on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But essentially, she was transformed, and she transformed her workplace. The second one, individual and community, i.e. women's and civil rights movement. I think one of the better examples of this in terms of media is a movie called The Help. And this is the Help trailer. And maybe some of you have seen this movie or you have read the book. Either one, fantastic. So let's play this one a little bit.
Sorry, I'm late.
We didn't have to think you'd leave all mess.
It does take 4 years, Jolene. I got a job today, writing for the Jackson Journal.
Great. You can write my obituary. Charlotte's feeling, dead. Her daughter, still single.
This dress look handmade.
I reckon when you finish, you'll want.
Thank you.
She look like a winning horse at the Kentucky Derby.
I've drafted the Home Health Sanitation Initiative,
The what?
a bill that requires every white home to have a separate bathroom for the help.
Maybe we should just build you a bathroom outside, Haley.
Minnie? Hey, Evelyn.
Hey, Manny. These women raise white children. We love them, and they love us, but they can't even use the toilets in our houses.
Minnie, are you in there?
You said to write about what disturbs me, particularly if it bothers no one else. I'd like to write something from the point of view of the help.
I want to interview you.
No maid is ever going to tell you the truth. That's a hell of a risk to take in Jackson, Mississippi.
Courage isn't just about being brave. It's about overcoming fear and daring to do what is right for your fellow man.
What changed your mind?
God. And Miss Haley Holbrook.
I'm going to help with your stories. We all are.
Y'all brought me into this, but I'm gonna finish it.
Have you lost your mind? No, ma'am. But you about to. It's quite scandalous. Sounds like Jackson, if you ask me. You tell Avery, do I have plans for her?
You are godless. We gonna done it now.
Well, hopefully you got a sense then of what that movie is about. And again, it's, as your book talks about, community transformative learning. It's talking about women's civil rights. It mentions PETAs and any of these kinds of what you might term as movements, where people get together and they start to learn about a situation, they engage with the concept, and they take their individual learning and move it to a community as a social movement to have change. That was I believe the last one that they talked about in your text. So let's take a look then now at promoting transformative learning and what that might look like, when you might want to use that. So when would you want to use transformative learning? And there's a fine line here that I want to talk about: education versus advocacy. Sometimes we are using deeply emotional learning to get a response, to get folks engaged in our content, to actually get them to not just to educate them and give them, like I did in my first presentation that I just made to you with the naturalization ceremony, where I learned a little bit and then I was kind of like brought in by not just the emotion of it, but I could really see how that individual's life was impacted and how I relate to that and I'm grateful for, and how I could actually be a proponent of making sure that naturalization and citizenship remains a part of this country. In this case, when you would like to use transformative learning, you are trying to usually get people to change their perspective or perception and maybe even become an advocate and play on your team. So 18 years of my life, I was the director of Utah Agriculture in the Classroom, doing educational programs to increase agricultural literacy. And one of my goals was to have my students, in most cases they were teachers and pre-service teachers, understand or perceive agriculture in a positive way. There's a lot of negative things out there about ag, and I thought, and most of us engaged in this ever think, that if we educate people about agriculture, that they will have a different point of view, a different perspective. But interestingly enough, individuals who want to portray agriculture in a negative way put out a lot of emotional kinds of things to use transformative learning to get illicit response, to get people riled up about particular things of which maybe not quite all the facts or educational materials were out there or known. In fact, sometimes these things can be quite inflammatory. So my job then was not just to educate teachers and then their students about agriculture and provide them with those resources and materials, but also to get them to perceive agriculture in a different way. And I wasn't going to be able to do that by just giving them content. I learned that early on. They understood agriculture, but they didn't have any close, deep, emotional learning that transformed them to say, I understand farming. I understand what that way of life is like. I understand the hardships of it. I am grateful that I only spend 10% of my income and that less than 2% of the population of the population of the United States are farmers, and they feed us and they feed the rest of the world. I had to think of a way to use transformative learning. And so as I went through in my career, I figured out different ways. I had found different videos. But the thing that I found that worked the best was having students thresh between their hands a head of wheat. And if you've never done that, you just get a head of wheat, break it off of the stem, and thresh it between your hands, and the little wheat seeds fall out, and it's called separating the seed, or separating the wheat seed from the chaff, that stuff that's up there on the head. And as they did this, they would then have to take that seed, and they would each have their own head that they would thresh and put it in a grinder. And after 10 or 12 of them would grind one head of wheat and the seeds that came out of that head of wheat, they realized they don't even have a cup of flour, and that the cup of flour, they need 3 cups to make 1 loaf of bread, which would help one of their families for a few days. This experience that I provided for them transformed them. How do I know? Because at the end of the day, after they realize that they have all threshed a head of wheat, they have all taken the seeds and put them in the grinder, and they have less than a cup, and that room wouldn't be able to hold enough wheat, or not the room, but we wouldn't be a big enough surface in that room to grow enough wheat that they could feed their family for even a few months. They have this aha moment. And the greatest compliment that I could receive after a workshop like this, and a teacher, more than once that this happened, was when a teacher would say, I will never look at a loaf of bread the same again. I had transformed them, not because I gave them all the facts about how we plant seeds, how we water them, how the farmer takes care of them, how they're harvested, how they're ground up, but because they had actually gone through this big experience, and this experiential learning, which is next week, of threshing it out, grinding it, and having the realization of what it was going to take to make a loaf of bread and how much space, physical land it was going to take. They were never going to look at a loaf of bread the same again. Now, that is me trying to advocate for agriculture, but not in an inflammatory way. And I think that there is a fine line between education and advocacy. And I think that many of you can think of some examples, and I may even put this in the conversation, where maybe education has crossed the line. Somebody's saying, well, we're doing this and it's all about education. But in reality, they're not teaching students about what to think, or how to think rather. They're teaching them what to think. And that's where we have to get concerned. We have to get concerned if you're not open enough and provide that space that allows for maximum amount of learning to take place, where people can come together and agree to disagree. And transformative learning, I've seen it work, but it took me a long time to perfect the skill of trying to really change them. Because not only were they admitting to me that they were changed internally, and I could give you many more examples of things that I did with soils and rice and so on and so forth to get them there, but they were able to tell others, hey, do you know what it takes to get a loaf of bread? And people say, wow, I see you changing. I see you buying, this type of bread. It'd be, whatever it might be. So it was also observed by others. So that's when you might want to promote it and take a look at transformative learning. Steps for fostering transformative learning. I'm just going to review these. Your text does a really good job. Steps for fostering it, you need an opportunity for critical reflection. You're reflecting on a situation. In my case, I think you could point out where I was having that critical reflection in both looking at the Little Rock Nine, and also looking at the naturalization. I was like, that's really interesting. And reflecting on what I thought about it, and then proceeded to learn and become engaged and then be transformed. Preparing for non-rational media, such as storytelling, all of this actually, most of these movies and things I've just showed you are storytelling. They're embodied knowledge. They're intuitive or effective. Sometimes what we mean by that is you can read between the line, or there's a particular affect, the way the person's voice comes across, or the way we see it portrayed in such a way. It's very visual. There's emotional and spiritual experiences, and I think you probably all could chime in on those kinds of things that have transformed the way that you've thought about it. And obviously the first one that I showed you was quite emotional, to witness that and to hear Gerda's story. Opportunity for dialogue or discourse and social interaction. This was a couple of really interesting quotes that I've kind of briefly mentioned moments ago. But opportunity for dialogue and discourse, that's really important. And your text discusses discourse is not a war or a debate. It is the conscientious effort to find agreement and to build a new understanding. And I might add that it's okay to agree to disagree on any particular issue. It doesn't mean that you can't associate with those persons or that condition or whatever it is. It just simply means on this item you agree to disagree. And quite honestly, if a lot of the places in the world that have war or giant debates would just say, okay, there's no harm by us agreeing to disagree, so let's just leave it at that. Now, sometimes if there is harm, you can hopefully find agreement to build a new understanding. And remember, creating this space that's safe, open, and supportive is really important when you're trying to engage and promote in transformative learning. Now, evaluating this, and this is really important, I think, especially for those of you who are in extension programs where you don't have a standard that you're trying to connect to. You are actually maybe trying to have them have a transformative learning experience where the person's perspective has changed. So here's some ideas from your text, and they'll work in formal situations as well as informal or non-formal, but primarily in non-formal and informal. Evaluation, and sometimes we will call this qualitative types of research. You'll look at narratives and stories through interviews, and that movie, The Help, was all about her interviewing and doing stories, and she had then journals or logs, if you will, talking about these things. Case studies, kind of give you a case study here at the beginning, Spielmaker's personal case study, but I think you know what those are. Videos are another way, whether it's an interview type video or you're watching some sort of video. I showed you a video of a place I was at live, that conference, but maybe you watch that video and you are as transformed as I have been. Journals, surveys, checklists, that may be a very, a little bit quantitative, but oftentimes a checklist can help. You might ask a particular question about how do you view that loaf of bread? How were you changed? I was changed by, and you could use some sort of checklist. And that kind of goes along with self-report and the gathering of data. Photography and other works of art might be a good way to evaluate transformative learning. What kind of imagery does your mind have both pre and post? I think that's a really good, prior to the experience and after the experience. And a portfolio is just a nice way to keep together journal entries, logs, checklists, and those kinds of things that kind of document and show a trend or an understanding or a change in learning. Finally, this concept maps, and you'll see that it's hot linked in case some of you don't have a good idea about how those are done. I really like concept maps. In fact, I did a concept map on with my students about agriculture, where they put in the middle the word agriculture, and then they had to draw out from there. And most of you are familiar with concept maps. If you're not, click on the link and go learn. But they had to put on there how the lines were drawn to other parts of their life. And what I wanted them to do was hopefully get out from the word agriculture all the way to their food, clothing, and shelter. And so I could actually use the concept map as a form of assessment, because when they would first draw their concept map, they had very few little bubbles about how agriculture connected to their life, whether it be in product or resource, or in sort of quality of life, whatever it was they didn't have, or career, they didn't have those connections very well. But then after we'd go through the workshop, I'd say, take out your concept maps, and you've got another 5 minutes to add to it everything that you've learned now about, in this case, agriculture. And they would just keep going. They would just explode. In fact, I developed a lesson on this topic for teachers about careers in agriculture, and it just gets them really engaged, and it transforms them, or at least it helps you to measure any kind of transformation that has taken place. So let's take a look then at evaluating transformative learning. And your text has a really good little paragraph on page 97, and I just kind of tried to cut it out of my electronic version about evaluating transformative learning. And I hope that the examples that I've provided for you today of my own personal experience going through transformative learning situations as the learner and both as the teacher, as I facilitated Ag in the Classroom trainings, will give you some understanding about how this plays out. The knowledge gained from a transformative learning experience is emancipatory. That is, freeing and empowering rather than instrumental knowledge about observable material things or communicative knowledge about social interaction. I think this is a really key point to keep in mind. It's freeing, it's empowering. It's not really that I'm measuring your knowledge and various facts that you can repeat back to me. I'm not asking you how many seeds are on that head of wheat. I'm not asking you how many cups of flour it's going to take. I'm not asking you how to fertilize it or water it or how many days of growth. That's knowledge based. And that's a different type of learning, and we're gonna be able to measure that in a different type of way. But transformative learning is experience. It's emancipatory. It's freeing. It's empowering. It's like, hey, I will never look at a loaf of bread the same again. It's not necessarily communicative, but it is really quite a bit more liberating. The second part here, emancipatory knowledge involves critical reflection and challenge to the status quo. If you're familiar with Norma Rae or that last movie, The Help, and Civil Rights Movement, I think you can see this. Of this type of knowledge, Cranton and Hogan write, emancipatory knowledge cannot be predetermined, predicted, or set up as an objective for a course. Well, I think as an instructor, I pretty much set up that I really wanted them to be changed by my presentation and look at a loaf of bread differently. But I really couldn't predict that it was going to happen or make it predetermined. After I had done these a number of times, I really had it down to a pretty good science where I could really get them to be transformed just by how I set it up. In fact, this next statement, educators can create the environment and conditions that may foster transformative learning, but they cannot make it happen. Doggone it. But if we can set it up, there's probably a good likelihood that it'll take place. Yet it can be evaluated, and it is evaluated in some way every time a researcher determines the extent to which the transformative learning has occurred in a particular setting, context, or program, and every time an educator realizes that some of her students have experienced major shift in their perspective on themselves or the world around them. In fact, this is like the wahoo movement, light bulb going off exponentially squared, instead of just like, oh yeah, they really get the concept. Now we not only get them understanding and being able to communicate the concept, and maybe to us demonstrate in some way some kind of behavior change, but now we also have this major transformation where they themselves are changed and they are different, and other people can really notice that around them. So much to the point that they're probably going to take it further and engage oftentimes in their community or become an advocate for one particular experience. Caveat, as educators, we have to really walk that fine line between advocacy and education. And it is a pretty fine line. But if we maintain a space where people can continue to think and have dialogue or discourse about content, we are maintaining that space for transformative learning. All right, some concluding thoughts. Is transformative learning really different from any other type of learning? I think I've given you my opinion. What is being transformed in this type of learning, and do you think transformations are permanent? I'm going to put these questions together along with maybe one other one in your discussion this week, and then we'll come back on the flip side in my reflection and talk about these questions and how you responded to them at the end of the week in the discussions.